All right, so we've got Polycab's Q2 FY25 earnings presentation right here. And let me tell you, it's packed with figures. But don't worry, we're going to break it all down, make it crystal clear what's really going on with Polycab this quarter.
Exactly. We're going beyond just the numbers, to uncover the why behind the what. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid grasp on Polycab's performance.
So first things first, the big news, Polycab just pulled in their highest quarterly revenue ever.
It's pretty impressive.
54,984 million. To put that in perspective, that's a lot of money.
A whole lot. And it gets even better. Their first half-year revenue, it just blew past the 100 billion mark.
Okay, now that's seriously impressive. It really shows they're at the top of their game. But, and there's always a but in these reports, their EBITDA margins, they took a bit of a dip.
Yeah.
Now, before anyone's eyes glaze over, think of it like this. EBITDA margin is basically a measure of how efficiently a company makes money from its operations.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if Polycab's selling, let's say, high-end speakers. A shrinking margin means they're making a little less profit on each speaker they sell, even if they're selling a ton more speakers overall.
Perfect analogy. So the question is, why the dip? Especially with these record revenues, shouldn't profits be soaring too?
You think so, right?
Yeah.
Well, there are a couple of things at play here. One, their wires and cables segment, which is usually their star performer, faced some headwinds this quarter.
Headwinds like what?
Increased competition, for one. When more players enter the market, it can put pressure on prices. And if Polycab has to lower their prices to stay competitive, well, their profit per sale takes a hit.
Makes sense. So more competition is squeezing their margins a bit. What's the other factor?
Right. The second thing is something called a shift in sales mix.
Okay, so more competition makes sense. But shift in sales mix, what's that all about?
So it's not just about selling more wires and cables. It's about what kinds they're selling. Think of it like this. They've got their, let's say, their industrial grade cables, the really specialized stuff, probably comes with a higher profit margin.
Because it's the fancy stuff, right?
Exactly. And then they've got their everyday cables, the kind you'd find in your house. This quarter, it seems they sold more of the everyday kind and less of the high-margin specialty stuff.
So even though overall sales are up, the profit per sale might be a bit lower because of what they're selling more of.
Exactly. And that, combined with the pricing pressure we talked about, explains the dip in their wires and cables segment margin.
Got it. Now, even with that dip, they still saw a 28% jump in domestic revenue year over year in that segment. It's clearly a growing market.
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the infrastructure projects happening in India right now. New buildings, roads, everything. They all need wires and cables, and Polycab is there to supply them.
So they're riding the wave of India's growth.
Precisely. And it's not just these massive projects. The real estate market is booming, too. New apartments, new houses, all need wiring. Polycab benefits from that as well. And there's an interesting tidbit here. Remember how we talked about institutional versus distribution sales?
Remind me.
Right, so institutional sales, those are the big fish, large orders from companies or government bodies. Think huge infrastructure projects, right? Distribution is more about getting your product into stores, reaching individual customers.
Okay, so what's the story there?
Well, Polycab's institutional business is growing faster than their distribution sales, meaning those large-scale projects are playing a big role in their growth, which is good in the short term, but it does make you wonder.
About.
What if those big infrastructure projects slow down, government cuts spending, or the real estate market cools off? Could leave Polycab a little vulnerable, don't you think? Something to keep an eye on.
Makes sense. Can't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
Exactly. Now, speaking of not putting all your eggs in one basket, Polycab's not just focused on India. They're expanding internationally, too.
Yeah, I saw that. Their international business had some good growth this quarter.
Definitely did. Their international revenue was up a healthy 36% compared to last quarter. Now, to be fair, it's still a pretty small part of their overall revenue, only about 6.1% for Q2. But that consistent growth tells us they're serious about becoming a global player. They're not just dipping their toes in the water, they're going for it.
So they're thinking global. Good for them. But let's circle back to India for a sec. We talked wires and cables, but what about their fast-moving electrical goods, the FMEG? Seems like that's still a big chunk of their business.
It is, and while it might not have the same explosive growth as wires and cables, an 18% year-on-year jump is nothing to scoff at, especially since this is typically a slower quarter for that segment.
Yeah, it's like different parts of the business have their own rhythms, right?
Exactly. And this steady growth in FMEG, it tells me their strategy in this area is working. Think about it. All the advertising you're seeing, the new products they keep launching, they're pushed to be in every store and online. It's all connected.
So what's fueling this FMEG growth? Any standout products this quarter?
Fans did really well.
Fans, really?
Yeah, fans. They got a nice boost, partly because last summer was relatively mild, so lower base for comparison, and also online sales for fans just exploded this year.
Makes sense when it's hot. Who wants to go store to store looking for a fan? Just click and it's delivered, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so fans did great. Anything else?
Switchgears also had a strong quarter.
Switch gears. That makes sense with the whole real estate boom, right? New construction, new switch gear,
Exactly. It's a pretty essential purchase.
for sure. What about lights and luminaires? Did they brighten things up?
That's an interesting one. They actually sold more lights and luminaires overall, but
Mhm.
they faced some serious pricing pressure in this segment, which ended up impacting their revenue growth.
Ah, so more competition means lower prices.
Pretty much.
Gotcha. Okay, before we wrap up, we got to talk about the elephant, or rather, the rocket ship in the room, the others segment. 241% year-on-year revenue jump. That's huge.
That's the EPC business. Engineering, procurement, and construction, they're involved in these massive projects, building things from the ground up. And this quarter, it's really about them delivering on their EPC orders.
So they're getting things built and reaping the rewards. Makes sense, but can they keep up this kind of growth?
It's a good question. I mean, the momentum is incredible, but EPC projects can be unpredictable. There can be delays, unexpected costs, the market can shift.
Right, right.
We might not see another 241% jump next quarter, but Polycab focusing on EPC, that's a good sign for their long-term growth.
Okay, so cautious optimism for the EPC business. Now, before we sign off, I got to give them props for all the awards they've been racking up. Most admired brand, best cabling brand, iconic brand of the year. That's impressive.
It really is. Shows they've got a great reputation in the industry.
Absolutely. All right, so there you have it, our deep dive into Polycab's performance this quarter. They're a strong company, no doubt, but they're not immune to challenges, whether it's competition or the ups and downs of big projects.
The key takeaway here, stay informed, understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.